5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hello, my Richies, and welcome back to another episode of the Make Life Rich Movement podcast. My name is Sarah. I'm your host, and in today's episode, we are discussing how to stand with conviction. How do we go about living for something? I want to start this off with a personal story, and not really a specific story, but more an overview of how I used to live my life. And this is something I've been really thinking about, especially with the journey that I'm currently on and the ways in which I'm looking to refine myself, not only within the morals of the Lord and just trying to become a better person, but also in ways of looking to separate myself from societal implications of how I should behave and look more towards moralistic indicators of how I should behave and how I should interact with those in the world around me. I grew up in a very small town, and we now live in that small town again. And where I live is a place that could be frequently hit with large storms, namely nor'easters or hurricanes or tropical storms. And because of this, the temperature of the town is one where everyone works together. Everyone looks out for each other. We are all able to be taken out, in essence, by nature. And when these storms and situations happen, you really do need to rely on your neighbor for help in times of distress, in these very severe moments that are fleeting, yet when they are here, they are extremely serious. And it is very important that you have a good rapport with the people that you live near and around. When I moved to Philadelphia for college, I became very quickly aware of how disconnected the society was that I was now a part of. And the ways in which people connected with one another was through capitalistic or cultural implications of how we were supposed to behave or dress or interact with one another based on television, media, trends, just like the most frivolous things of this world that are not in any way, shape, or form really moving your life forward in any kind of manner. And it was really disheartening to me, like smiling at someone could open me up to a crime, or at the very least to an angry person cursing me out. That was like one of the first really crazy things that happened to me when I moved to Philadelphia. Where I live, you would smile and say hello, good morning, send your salutations to everyone. And it was safe. And it was not only safe, but it was just something you did. And if you didn't do it, you were rude. You were, removing yourself from the people around you. And in a small town, it's really difficult to do that and be able to live there peacefully. So in moving into Philadelphia, I just became intimately aware of how disconnected everyone was as a community. And it was disheartening. I will say that over the nearly 20 years that I lived there, that disconnected societal and cultural landscape of Philadelphia chipped away at the neighborly, moralistic center that was at the heart of my experience of growing up. And it took moving back here for me to see again how much I needed to warm back up to people after having to protect myself for so many years in a city where friendliness could get you robbed, in trouble, or even killed. And, there were a number of times too where maybe the punishment wouldn't be as severe as being robbed or murdered, but you'd be outcast if you were not a part of the trend, the societal winds that be, the flow and temperature of the cultural norms that were being heavily laid upon the city as a way of how to behave, how to think, how to decide how to move forward with your life. And as a publicist, someone that was always needing to be on top of trends, this was a really concerning thing for me that throughout my career there was always at the back of my mind, just like I'm helping this XYZ make more money. But in the process of that, they're hurting this community, or, they are blighting out this environment or this resource for them to be able to exist. And slowly but surely, I found myself really not being able to work with many people just because of the negative reverberations that would come from me bolstering their business and helping them to grow and to continue down this really almost negative path that they were leading with their business. I'd watched friends completely change their stated beliefs when the social costs became too high. And I realized I was looking at, in the flesh, what happens when you live for nothing. You become whatever the room around you requires you to be. There's a sentiment, and I should have looked it up before putting it in the show, but when you stand for nothing, you'll fall for anything. And that most certainly now is the time and the age that we find ourselves in America in 2025. Morals have gone absolutely out the window. In fact, most are persecuted for their morals, and at the very least are made fun of for being old-fashioned, or even deemed evil for being conservative, or finding themselves on the wrong side of the culturally deemed appropriate party. And in moving back to Cape May, a very small county and place, it was so apparent to me in the deep contrast between Philadelphia, the city, and this small area that I lived in, that we've become a nation of people who stand for everything and nothing simultaneously. And it's become a cultural phenomenon of strong opinions with weak backbones. Something that really just icks me to my core and really started to make me feel repelled from those that stood for everything and nothing at the same time. And I removed these people from my life voraciously and quickly upon really deciding for myself that I was no longer going to interact with those people that were following the trend in the culture, rather than solidifying in themselves who they are, what they stand for, what they believe in, and ultimately how they are unwaveringly going to treat people and themselves. Americans have never been more politically passionate, yet personally cowardly. And that to me is just a shame, a downright shame. We argue endlessly online, but we won't have honest conversations with our friends, family, and neighbors. We've created a society where having conviction is considered divisive, and taking a stand is considered judgmental, and standards for truth are labeled intolerant. I think throughout this episode today, we are going to explore how America's spiritual collapse has created a nation of moral cowardice, and how faith in God provides the backbone needed to live for something in this world, something greater than comfort could ever provide you. We're going to examine why conviction requires courage, how fear-based living destroys your character, and why living for Christ gives you something worth standing for. I will share some biblical conviction that differs from cultural opinion mongering, and why your life needs to be about more than just getting along and going with the float on the boat in the ocean of cultural supremacy. I hope you enjoy this episode, and let's dive right on in. The cowardice crisis in America is the exact way in which we have lost our backbones, and the spiritual vacuum is at America's core of issues. The post-Christian moral confusion has really removed God and eliminated transcendental truth that is worth defending. When society abandoned belief in absolute truth and divine authority, it removed any foundation solid enough to justify taking difficult stands and enduring social costs for principle. What does that mean? Without God as an ultimate reality at the core of who we are, all moral positioning can become merely personal preferences, making conviction seem like a pointless stance of stubbornness rather than necessary courage. And when you do not have a finite standard of your beliefs and what you stand for, you are going to become a sliding scale of interpretation that moves with societal and cultural beliefs that ultimately are fueled by those in power and those with capitalistic tendencies to want to rob Americans specifically of their moralistic being by making them believe that capitalistic and materialistic things are what are needed to get by in this world and beyond. Now, relativism and spinelessness go hand in hand. The way in which your truth of thinking destroys the possibility of conviction is rather simple. If everyone's truth is equally valid, then no truth is worth defending against opposition. Moral relativism inevitably produces moral cowardice. How? When truth becomes subjective rather than let me step back. When your truth becomes a subjective preference rather than an objective reality, standing for anything becomes impossible because there's nothing solid enough to stand on. And if you notice these days, especially within the media, they are making America seem like we are on quicksand and we are diving quickly. What are all the solutions for this? To go with whatever it is that those in power say is what is truth, what is the way. To find divisiveness among party lines by inducing tribalism that has only replaced our previous way of living for thousands of years that entirely rested and relied upon everyone having faith in a higher power and believing in God. Comfort has become our highest value. And in America, this is certainly something that we are rather gluttonously blessed with. And I used blessed as a light term here because I personally believe that comfort is the basis of all evil. But when material comfort becomes life's primary goal, anything that threatens comfort, including conviction, becomes the enemy. And that could mean mental comfort, emotional comfort, physical comfort. There is a range of comfort that we have become very inclined towards not only insisting upon, but demanding as Americans, no matter what moralistic things are tossed to the side in pursuit of this comfort. Americans have been so successful at creating a safe space and comfortable lives that we have literally lost the plot and the muscle memory of enduring hardship for principle. And not only for principle, but for salvation and for fulfillment within ourselves in this life that we're living in this meat suit. So what is the psychology of moral cowardice? First, it starts with conflict avoidance and people pleasing, which is absolutely something we learn in our early childhood years. If you've got inner child work left around this, you may find yourself being someone that just bows down to what culture and those around you demand of you, rather than you feeling convicted enough and courageous enough to stand behind your beliefs that differ from the majority. Many Americans have been also conditioned to believe that conflict and creating conflict is worse than compromising the truth. And this produces people that will sacrifice anything to maintain surface level peace. People pleasing also masquerades as kindness when in reality it actually represents cowardice. It prioritizes temporary comfort over long-term character and truth that is built within these difficult conversations. There's also the instance of social approval and the addiction that comes with needing to be accepted by others around you. Dependence on others' opinions of you actually eliminates your independent conviction. And although you may want to belong to a crowd, you do not need to belong to the majority and bow down to their beliefs, when in reality, you can have some difficult conversations, find a common ground together with them, and also find those that believe in what you believe in, creating a true tribe and community around you that is built on belief, truth, and conviction, rather than surface level relationships that are only getting along for the sheer purpose of there being no conflict, no discomfort, no uncomfortable conversations. There's also, the fear of being canceled. I can tell you, when I took Christ into my heart, the fear of being canceled literally went out the window because I saw how temporary this world is. And I realized how often I was trading my eternal salvation just to fit in within a 5 to 10 minute conversation with someone else. Even the instance of saying, oh, yep, I believe in that. I believe in that thing you're saying. Yep, I do think that children should be able to get, their private parts cut off before they fully completed puberty or had their brain fully formed. Yep, I agree entirely. When in reality, I did not. And I think that is a monstrous thing to do to a child who has literally no idea whatsoever of the life that lives ahead of them, let alone enough conviction within them to understand that who they were born to be is who they were born as. And they will eventually grow into loving that part of themselves. That's a really difficult conversation to have these days. And I can't tell you how many times I have just let the other person's belief be one that I let them think that I believed in too. But not only was I offending myself, I was offending God with that lie. And I was making our relationship, even if it was a fleeting moment of meeting and speaking with a stranger, one that was not based in love, kindness, or truth, what made it literally a lie. I was literally lying to this person's face. Why? I had no respect for myself and my convictions and my place and my feeling in this world, and I wanted their comfort to reside over mine. Is that best? No. We must be truthful and we must be honest, no matter who or what it hurts in the process. My father always said the truth hurts whether you have to hear it or say it. And I have lived by that so fully. And in the moments where I've shied away from that, I always felt deep shame after that conversation ended, because I knew that I not only did that person wrong, I did myself wrong. And now as a follower of Jesus, I know that I had done God wrong. And that to me is something I'm still working on correcting and asking for forgiveness for, because I just refuse to give into the panderings of cultural norms any longer. I won't do it. I shan't do it. So cancel culture fear. Let's talk about it. Public shaming creates preemptive surrender, and the fear of being canceled, criticized, or socially ostracized has created a generation of self-censoring individuals before anyone even asks them to. And that's what I was doing. When the cost of having conviction might include loss of reputation, relationships, or livelihood, many people choose to have no convictions rather than to risk the consequences of this world. If you don't find yourself in a place of religious belief at this current moment, you may find this a helpful scenario. Consider you live your life people-pleasing on and on and on. You don't really believe in a higher power specifically. Maybe you don't have a name for them. You know someone made this planet, made this earth, made these birds, these animals, this computer, the screen you're watching it from. But you don't really think that there is an instance of you needing to change or grow or evolve with who you are, because you've become so attached to what this world has to offer you. And then you meet someone who had a near-death experience, which is an easy thing to come across because it happens every day. And in meeting that person, you knew them well before. And after having met them seeing them again rather, from their near-death experience, they let you know what they saw and what they felt and what that made them do afterwards when they woke up again. Oftentimes, they say they were washed with a love that they had never felt before, an all-consuming, inconsequentially, their brain is just too small to decipher what it was they felt surrounding them and filling every pore of their being. And then they made contact with our Creator, our blessed Father that put all of us here for a reason. And they not only realized they weren't living their life correctly, but they weren't living their life at all. And they realized how much they were squandering away this precious life they had been given, every moment of it. And in hearing that story, you find yourself getting goosebumps because you realize you have been living your life for nothing because you have no convictions to rest upon to be able to not only judge, but scale yourself against societal implications of how you must be and cultural and capitalistic endeavors that want you to conform. And this is of no surprise for any of us, and deep down we all know it to be true, but capitalistic and culturalistic endeavors are not of God. They are of man. And man is greedy, and fallible and full of sin and always wants what they want for themselves. And that's okay. I'm currently still wiping away those predilections from my being. And it's going to take time, friends. But every day I wake up and I thank God for a new day. Every day I go to sleep, I thank God for the growth that I had that day. I thank God for the increasing conviction within my heart to stand morally sound against the cultural and societal things that are constantly barraging on us day after day after day. Conform, conform, conform. No longer. All you have to do is wake up every day grateful, thank God for the growth that came into your life, ask Him at night for continued growth if you are gifted another day, and rest peacefully in your sleep knowing that you are growing in conviction and you are growing in your moral standards and you are making the world a better place by doing so. And not only the world, but your internal life, your peace, your fulfillment, your family's well-being, your community standing. Everything gets better when you find conviction within your heart and you know what you stand for. Corporate institutional cowardice is another one, and organizations are literally prioritizing profit over principle. If you've ever worked corporate or for, a large franchise of any kind, you know what I'm talking about. There's a part of you that goes, ugh, do I really want to keep doing this for a check? Is this really worth my soul for this check? And I understand. I've lived below the poverty level the majority of my life, okay? I hear you, I see you, I feel you. But when we allow corporations, schools, institutions to constantly compromise their stated values when standing for them becomes financially or socially costly, you're going to find that the same institutions that claim to care about justice, truth, peace, human dignity will abandon these principles in an instant the moment they conflict with profit or public approval or investor status. And it's in the news every single day. You don't have to have too many in-your-face instances of this because you know it to be true, because you see it every day. You see it at your job. You hear about it with your friends' jobs. You see it in commercials. You hear about it in the news. You read about it online. You see it on Instagram and TikTok. It's our reality. So let's talk about the conviction deficit. What happens when you stand for nothing? First, what are the personal consequences of living a convictionless life? You're going to find yourself in an identity crisis. And if you haven't approached that yet, you can feel those inklings moment by moment when you know that you're not living in alignment with the things that are really meant for your soul and for your heart. Lack of conviction also creates an unstable sense of self. When you stand for nothing, your identity becomes dependent on circumstances of others, culturally and society, and those expectations rather than internal principles and divine calling. And people without convictions become chameleons, constantly changing to match their environment, which creates chronic anxiety about who they really are. You also will find yourself in decision paralysis. The absence of guiding principles really makes every decision and choice torturous. And without core convictions at the heart of your decision-making abilities, every choice becomes equally valid and equally meaningless, creating paralysis and regret. People who stand for nothing have no framework for evaluating opportunities, relationships, or directions, making them perpetually unsure about their choices. This was me. As a publicist in a liberal city, it was really important that I mimic and mirror what was expected of the city. And that always kind of leaned really heavily on political beliefs, political instances, party lines, and what those party lines were about. What were their moralistic endeavors? And it really just led me to existential emptiness. I began to hate my career. I began to really just disavow from wanting to help anyone to grow their business because it was just leading to a baseless and continually morally bankrupt city that I was living in. The profound meaningless that took over my heart really made everything feel like it was a waste of my time. And when your highest goal is comfort and your deepest fear is conflict, life becomes an empty pursuit. And that empty pursuit allowed no joy, no peace, no pleasure. And it really did lead me to avoid difficulty. And in doing that, it also led me to avoid pain and trickled down in ways in which my personal life became a mess. Convictionless living produces existential despair because humans need moralistic guidelines. And humans are created for a purpose larger than personal satisfaction. There's also relational destruction through the spinelessness that we find the majority of America existing in today. Shallow relationships, loss of respect, enabling dysfunction. Conflict avoidance prevents deep connection, and losing faith in people that won't take a stand really leads to a loss of respect for not only your friends, family, and society, but larger implications of what humanity is and what it stands for. And by enabling dysfunction, we are refusing to confront those wrongs, and it enables continuation of those things, also bolstering cancel culture in a way that allows those perpetuating that majority of, wrong that is being propped up as the proper way of thinking, believing, living, etc., to fail that internal calling of yours for a higher way of living, believing, existing, loving, respecting, and connecting. When good people won't stand against bad behavior, you are becoming complicit in not only its continuation, but its expansion. And I think there is something to be said about the cultural consequences, of widespread conflict. And rather, the cowardice that comes from avoiding the widespread conflict that we find ourselves in within America today. There's certainly a moral drift that will happen. And when society declines because good people won't defend good principles, it becomes very difficult to climb our way back out of this hole. And I believe that is where we are right now. We see a really big uptick in Christian beliefs and people converting to the faith and believing in God. And most people seem to be finding a lot of peace and fulfillment within the Beatitudes, which you can find in Matthew within the Bible. These were the principles and, in essence, the book of life, the rules of how to live and interact with others that Jesus left us with before he was taken from this world in the biggest sacrifice that we will ever be capable of seeing, recognizing, and accepting. Civilizations don't collapse because evil people take over. They collapse because good people become cowardly to resist evil's power and their advance. Cultural standards deteriorate gradually. This isn't something that always happens overnight, and each generation becomes less and less willing to defend these principles that previous generations considered non-negotiables. Let's take an instance of that. If you can think about your grandparents, maybe they were born in the 50s, maybe a bit earlier, depending on how old you are. The things that they stood for and they believed in are the same things now that they know are in peril and at risk of completely disbanding and being something completely of their past. And it's often the things you hear older individuals complaining about. Lack of respect, no more work ethic. People are lazy, they're ignorant, they're rude. There's no goodness, there's no unconditional love for thy neighbor. There's no just working for a greater purpose that we can all agree upon. And there's a pretty specific reason for that. When it comes down to tyranny of the loudest and loss of social trust, we're going to find ourselves in a space where it's difficult to locate your backbone, especially if that wasn't something that you saw readily modeled by your parents, because as I said, it's a slow drip. It's a slow erosion of good morals and principles being put to the wayside because good people are afraid to counteract evil people's beliefs and actions. Now, tyranny of the loudest is something I want to touch on here a little bit more deeply, because we are absolutely finding ourselves in that space of just echo chambers and virtue signaling of people that have nothing to stand upon, and they have their party and the media feeding them what it is that they should be living for every day. When most people won't speak up for reasonable positions, extreme voices dominate the public sphere, and it creates negative discourse and really just dangerous policy making that is mimicking the majority of those people that are cowards and have nothing to live for. Societies become ruled by whoever is willing to make the most noise and create the most conflict, while reasonable people withdraw from public engagement. This leads to a loss of social trust with those that are trying to live a good moralistic life. Institutional cowardice destroys public confidence and discourse. When institutions consistently compromise their stated principles for expedience, public trust suffers. And not only does it suffer, it erodes in all institutions, government entities, and leaders and power. People lose faith in democracy, education, journalism, you name it. And also religion, unfortunately, when these institutions won't stand for the truths they claim to represent. So how do we go about finding our backbone? For me, it was looking to God for faith and looking to God to find courage within that faith. Divine authority has become an immense foundation for my conviction, and it has led me to ultimate accountability. Answering to God has helped me to transcend what the human approval wants and desires of me. And in recognizing that ultimately I answer to God rather than popular opinion, social media mobs, cancel culture, governments, cultural trends, I found courage in standing for truth, regardless of the human response that may follow from the majority and what they think and believe. Divine authority and me trusting in divine authority has also provided me almost like a higher court of appeal rather than human judgment, making it possible for me to endure the heat that comes from these difficult conversations that I now force myself to have in order to protect and in order to prop up moral conviction against the majority's standard that is literally eroding our human experience and eroding our God-given right to peace and love. I also have leaned completely on finding absolute truth as my anchor and my North Star. God's unchanging nature has provided me so much peace in this really solid foundation that I was lacking before having Jesus in my life. And God's character and commands will never change. It doesn't matter about cultural fashion, social media trends, political lines. God provides an unchanging foundation for conviction that human philosophy cannot provide. When your convictions are rooted in divine relation rather than in human relation and human reasoning, your convictions remain stable regardless of intellectual trends or societal movements. Today in Mass, Father John George said something along the lines of, "The world may shake, but God remains sovereign," meaning God remains strong and in power. And that really hit me. With everything going on today, both politically and in the sphere of faith and the religious wars that we find ourselves creeping closer and closer to, I've been an absolute wreck and just so scared of what the world has in store for not only Christians, but those living in America that don't understand that even though they may not believe in God, they are absolutely living on a nation founded on Christian principles that the other wishes to not only destroy, but literally to attack with every bit of rage, vitriol, anger, and just violence that they can muster. And in having the eternal perspective of thinking beyond life's changes and what is worth defending, I found myself believing that not only does my life's actions have eternal significance on my soul, my choices have eternal consequences, and the temporary social cost of not wanting to have these difficult conversations is no longer something I'm willing to put along the wayside, because it has become unbearable. And it will be an unbearable price for me to pay for my eternal soul, because I don't wish to have difficult conversations with man here on earth. Now, what are some biblical models of courageous conviction? And I'm going to be reading from my notes here because I want to make sure that I'm getting it all right. I'm still very new in this arena. So Daniel was king of Israel. He had some very serious non-negotiables. He was so courageous. And you may know Daniel from the story of cutting off Goliath's head. He was this giant. He had also killed lions to defend his flock. He was a shepherd. Daniel decided in his heart not to compromise God's standards regardless of consequences, and God honored his conviction with protection and promotion. His willingness to face death rather than compromise worship demonstrated how divine relationships provide courage that human beings cannot generate and human reason cannot generate. We also have Jesus' unwavering truth-telling. Christ stood for truth despite its ultimate cost of his life, and what has to be the most torturous final hours of anyone's life that has ever existed. Jesus never softened to difficult truths to maintain popularity or avoid conflict and ultimately his death. He spoke divine truth regardless of the audience's response. And his willingness to die rather than compromise truth demonstrates that some things are more important than comfort, safety, or even life itself. I've been really having a hard time accepting that in the instance of the enemy coming face to face with me and saying, do you believe in Jesus Christ? And me knowing that when I say yes, there's a very high likelihood I'll be tortured or killed. And knowing that I must say yes, and knowing that that will mean an end to my life here on this earth. And a really big thing for me in becoming a Christian Catholic was understanding that we have been beguiled into thinking that this world is the life that we are seeking, and it isn't. This is the playground within which we grow in our convictions, in our morals. We become a good person. We sanctify ourselves in Jesus' sacrifice by trying to become a better person every day, making the world a better place every day. And it is all for the ultimate hope of bringing more people to the universal church. Catholic means universal, bringing everyone to the Catholic universal church and bringing them to the light and the love of God and his teachings. We've been beguiled by society to believe that this world is all that there is, and in the pursuits of things we need, riches, wealth, we've put to the side the things that really matter, that are earning us the eternal salvation of eternal life by God's side. Accepting that was huge for me. It freed me in so many ways of just not caring what society has to think anymore. I no longer feel like I need to have this bag, that bag, this clothes, go on this trip, have this, certain kind of car. I don't care. It's all fake. It's all of this world. It's all a lie. It is all a lie that society has given us to prop up those in power that want to make more money off of you and want to control you more. By you not paying attention to and prioritizing the sheer immense power of sanctifying and purifying your soul with good actions here on this earth, you are only helping to promote those in power that we all say we cannot stand anyway. It's a really sneaky little trick that the other does to keep you as their slave and keep them in a place of power, all the while not making the world that we live in here temporarily a better place. Within the Bible, there was also the apostolic boldness, and the early church maintained conviction under severe persecution. The apostles considered suffering for truth a privilege rather than a tragedy, demonstrating how divine calling transforms perspectives on difficulty and the removal of comfort and seeking comfort from their life. Their willingness to endure imprisonment, beating, and death for their convictions shows how divine purpose strengthens beyond human awareness, capability, and reasoning. So how do we allow our faith to help us develop courage? First, there is the identity that will be found with security in knowing who you are. Being God's child eliminates the fear and need for human approval. When your identity is secured in God's love and understanding as being his beloved child, criticism and rejection from human beings loses their power and their power to control you and your change of behavior and your change of choices to people please society. Divine acceptance also provides emotional foundations that you are absolutely seeking within yourself right here, right now, in this moment. Earthly rejection becomes more bearable when you have a faith and a belief in God that everything that you need will be provided to you, that this world is not what we are ultimately seeking, and that the salvation, peace, and understanding that we wish existed on this earth is waiting for us in eternal salvation with God. Divine strength is also possible when God is the absolute power that you allow to build your courage and not focus on accomplishments of this world. God promises strength for those who trust him, making it possible to endure difficult times, difficult conversations, difficult scenarios that you may find yourselves in that would overwhelm just pure human courage. Divine empowerment does not eliminate difficulty, but it provides a supernatural ability of sorts for you to endure and even thrive under pressure and difficult times and duress. Providential trust is really big too. This was something that really I bit right into and I hold on to still to this very moment. Believing in God's sovereignty removes all paralyzing fear. God is in charge of it all. And as a new Christian, I found it really difficult to understand why God would allow such evil. And I had to be reminded that he gave us free will. And in that free will, the indicator of it being free means that you're the one that gets to make those decisions. And if you have no conviction to stand upon, your free will is going to be at the behest of capitalistic and societal endeavors that do not have a moralistic grounding or foundation that they've built upon to ensure that the human race will continue to grow in a positive and loving trajectory. Practical faith-based courage building started really simply for me. Just started with a daily surrender. I woke up every morning thankful to God that he gave me another day, and I allowed myself to submit to God building character within me, mainly through larger challenges. And it wasn't like because I believe God started throwing larger challenges at me. Rather, I was able to look at the larger challenges that always exist in our life that are coming every day, every week, every month, every year, and being able to handle them differently because of the conviction of my faith and my beliefs. Practicing daily surrender to God in small matters builds not only spiritual muscle for standing firm when larger challenges arise, but it is going to help you develop your character through consistent obedience in private that becomes public courage to stand when necessary amongst humans, society, culture, etc. I also started praying for boldness. I asked God to provide me with the courage that enables supernatural bravery. And for me, it was just first starting out and having difficult conversations online, posting things that I was really afraid of those close to me or those I've known throughout my life, feeling like, what? Why do you believe that? Why do you feel that? Why are you saying that? That's this, that's that. I had to remind myself that through regular prayer for courage, I'd be able to withstand not only these accusations being thrown at me by humans who are fallible sinners, just like me, but it also led me to just really call upon and remember that all that matters is trying to lead a better life for God, because this world is temporary. I could die tomorrow, but I'm going to hopefully, God willing, live in eternity in heaven because of the way I lived my life here on earth. It was really important for me to find community support as well to keep building this courage and really relying on my faith and my beliefs. And fellowship with other believers certainly provides strength for difficult times and difficult standings when you need your courage and your conviction to really bolster your backbone through those uncomfortable conversations and instances. And in surrounding myself with people that share that divine respect for divine conviction, it provided me encouragement and accountability that I had been looking for my whole life. Within the Christian community, there are support systems that secular culture cannot provide when you face opposition for biblical standards. And ultimately, it led me to living completely for Christ. And it's not to say that I'm no longer a sinner. It's not to say that I don't still judge and I don't lie and like all these things that we find ourselves relying upon to be able to fit in. Rather, it shows me that Christ is worth living and dying for. When human interactions and humanity are not worth living and dying for. When Christ became my supreme treasure in my heart, all of my values aligned around him. All of my just hopes, actions, beliefs, my goals, they were all creating this coherent worldview in Christ that was worth defending to me. And it gave me that ability to finally stand for something rather than being a weather vane of societal thoughts, feelings, and trends. Living for Christ means that every decision, every relationship, and every opportunity is evaluated based on how it serves God's glory and God's kingdom. It also really gave me the ability to find love-based obedience. Devotion to Christ motivated courage within me because conviction based on love for Christ differs from mere duty or rule following. It springs from grateful responses within my heart to just respond to the unconditional divine love that God has given me from the moment I asked him to come into my heart. And I've also now, as a follower of Christ, been able to look back on my life and see all the times that God was right there with me in the worst of moments, even though I, as a person that made fun of people who believed in white Jesus in the sky. Oh, who's God? God's mean. God's terrible. Why would God make my dad sick? Like, I was so blasphemous and evil and hateful towards God for so many years of my life. And in looking back now as a follower of Christ, he was there all along, unconditionally loving me, no matter me smiting him, talking crap about him, being evil towards his followers, making fun of those that loved him. It's just my soul's been wiped clean in a way that has made so much room for growth in a better way, in a better direction. I'm not tied down anymore and chained to people pleasing those that don't even know what they stand for. And they expect me to waver in my beliefs for them because of what they feel this Tuesday or next week. Also, the internal investment that has come from following and living for Christ is giving me ultimate meaning to temperate choices and to places where I needed to almost like this world is moving so quickly and people's beliefs are changing like this, like that. It's at the drop of a hat. Every day it's something different. Every day it's some other social cause, some agenda that has been thrust upon you from billionaires all the way at the top, trickling all the way down to the bottom where we are. Every act of courage for Christ and for Christ's sake contributes to the eternal kingdom that cannot be seen and felt here, and it cannot be destroyed by earthly opposition. And living for Christ means that no courage is wasted because standing for truth is not meaningless. And even when the immediate results are disappointing, I know that I'm building towards the salvation of the kingdom that I ultimately will eternally rest in because of how I live my life here on earth. Sip break. So what does living for Christ look like practically, especially if you're a new follower or maybe you're someone thinking about returning to the faith? I feel very deeply for, and I pray for all of those with religious trauma. It seems like everyone in my life had some pretty intense, or at the very least, very disheartening religious trauma and interactions with the organized church and religion that have just led them to turn their backs on God. And if you need a place to start, it's with Jesus and just Jesus alone. If you need a chapter in the Bible to start with, you can start with John or Matthew. They just focus on Jesus's just absolute sweetness, his love, his just unconditional belief in us and knowing that there is goodness inside of us. And he never judges us, even at our messiest moment. And that was so important for me at the beginning of this journey. Truth-telling without compromise and, the Christian conviction of expressing life itself in honest communication is really important and was really important for me. And certainly, man, I had lumps in my throat for a ton of conversations that I've had with people close to me about, my following Christ now and ultimately me wanting to join the Catholic Church, which did upset a few people around me. And they voice their concerns and their opinions, but ultimately they know me and they know my heart and they know that I am the right person to dive into this journey. And slowly but surely, I hope that the changes in me will inspire changes within them that will hopefully lead them back to Christ. Christian conviction doesn't allow for convenient silence when truth needs to be spoken or wrong needs to be confronted. And within these conversations with people around me and ultimately strangers too, it's been easier for me to know that not only is God right by my side with his hand on my shoulder when I'm having these uncomfortable conversations, but he is already within everyone on this planet and he is working inside of them while I'm having these conversations with them to try and soften them or maybe find a little pinhole of an opening that I can get into to help them see that they are devout and worthy of the eternal love and salvation that comes from just believing in God. Having moral standards without apology is also a really great way to live for Christ. And, biblical values rather provide non-negotiable boundaries. Living for Christ means maintaining biblical moral standards regardless of cultural pressures to compromise or adapt. And the Christian conviction creates boundaries that do not shift with societal trends, political lines, those in power, capitalistic endeavors, etc., because they're based on the unchanging divine character of God. There's also something to be said when living for Christ about your sacrificial service. And living for Christ motivates costly love for others. Christian conviction leads to sacrificial service that costs you something for others' benefit, demonstrating divine love through human action. Living for Christ means you're willing to sacrifice comfort, convenience, and personal advantage for kingdom purposes, for bringing more people to the faith, which ultimately leads towards the transformative power of a Christ-centered approach to living. First, your character is going to form itself in a way that you've probably been hoping for your whole life. Living for Christ develops supernatural virtue, and although you will be a sinner for the rest of your life, we are fallible, we are not Jesus. He was the only perfect person on this planet that ever lived. We can try. And consistent living for Christ develops character qualities that purely human effort cannot provide. Joy, peace, love, patience, faithfulness. Divine transformation creates internal changes that naturally express themselves in external courage and conviction. You may have felt these things within maybe finding your husband or your wife, or when you first met your child, or in seeing a loved one pass and feeling the true sovereignty and sacredness of that moment, and knowing and being very convicted within that instance that there is absolutely a higher power and there is something beyond this world worth working towards. For me, becoming more centered in the way that I live for Christ has also provided purpose clarification, because a Christ-centered life provides clear direction, and I was really lacking clear direction. I was constantly trying to mold my career, my way of life, my way of being around what was happening in the world, and that just led me to be confused. It led me astray. It left me completely void of feeling fulfillment, and peace and joy were fleeting things that were not readily available in my soul because I did not have God's love guiding me day after day, step after step. It also led me to really just know that I am not in control. You know that Carrie Underwood song, Jesus Take the Wheel? Guys, he's already got the wheel. The wheel is his. You're in the bus, okay? He's driving the wheel. You're in the seat. There's no power that you can wield over God's plan for you. And it's like, everyone has that adage. It's been said a million different ways, but, God hears our plans and laughs because he thinks like, oh, that's cute. Like, no, you're going to go through this. And in going through that, it's going to meld you into the person I know you can be. It is going to lead you to the plans and the goals that I know you want and you are meant for in this world because I created you. Which leads ultimately to your legacy creation. And living for Christ builds something that outlasts your lifetime. Christian conviction creates a legacy of faithfulness that influences others long after your eternal life ends, your earthly life ends, rather, and your eternal life begins. Living for Christ means making an investment in the eternal kingdom rather than the temporary world, and the achievements and the cars and the houses and the money that you are acquiring here. You can't take them with you, guys. You hear that all the time. Money means nothing because you can't take it with you. Finally, overcoming obstacles to Christ-centered conviction starts with a little bit of... First, let's have some discernment between cultural Christianity and biblical Christianity. We have to avoid compromise that's disguised as wisdom. Many churches and Christians have accommodated culture so thoroughly that their Christianity requires no courage or conviction. True biblical Christianity will always create tension with fallen culture that is of the world because it calls people to standards that conflict with the worldly values we are forced into with capitalistic endeavors, government entities, your boss, your parents that are, ruling the home without God. And it ultimately is going to ask you to be realistic about difficulty without surrendering the truth. Living for Christ requires honest assessments of potential costs without using these costs as an excuse for the compromise and for your lack of conviction and ultimately tossing courage out the window. There's also something to be said about the perseverance that you will gain through opposition and having these conversations. Like when you maintain conviction when standing for Christ, it will be costly. Father John George said today, like, following Christ will not always be an easy endeavor. There will be prices to pay. But the prices we pay in this earthly realm are going to be earning us that eternal salvation that ultimately we need to keep our eyes focused on the prize. So I want to leave you with some practical steps for developing unshakable conviction. First, you need to identify your current conviction level. What is your compromise assessment? Examine areas where you've traded truth for comfort, and you will know these areas immediately. These are places where maybe you swallowed your pride. That's a big one, swallowing your pride. Or maybe you just wanted to keep the peace. Identifying these situations where you've remained silent about a biblical truth or a moral truth, rather than speaking up because you knew it would create conflict or cost you something, important to write down. It's super important to write down. Make a list of the times and the things and the conversations and the people that you have these interactions with, over, or for. And in examining these relationships, work situations, societal settings, where you've compromised your moralistic standards to maintain acceptance or avoid difficulty, it's going to be a lot easier for you to identify them immediately, nip them in the bud, and have a different approach to these circumstances that we find ourselves in all day long, multiple times a day, especially online. There's also something to be said about taking an inventory on fear and how it controls you, your actions, and your life. Recognizing what you're afraid to lose by taking a stand and enlisting the things that you're afraid to lose, whether that be your reputation, relationships, financial security, social acceptance. Being able to examine these fears is going to help you to control the choices that you make moving forward. And when you identify whether those fears are more powerful than your faith and how fear-based living contradicts your faith and your beliefs and your trust in that divine protection that God provides to everyone on this planet, you will be able slowly over time to make more conviction-based stands in those instances where you allowed fear to take the wheel away from God and drive you towards the other. There's also the beautiful instance of your values being able to clarify your decision making. Determining what you actually believe in is worth defending. And when you write down the biblical truths and moral principles you claim to believe and honestly assess whether your lifestyle and your choices reflect those beliefs, you will have a starting place to move forward from and be able to grow 1% a day stronger in your convictions and closer to God and the life that He wishes for you to lead. So I'm going to leave you with just a little bit of, let's say, man, this was going to be a very long episode, but we're already at an hour here, so I'm going to clip it. But let's get to the end. All right, I have a challenge for you, and it is this. I'm calling you to courage, my friends. And if you've made it this far in the episode, then you're absolutely ready for this challenge. I want you to consider conviction as your discipleship. What is discipleship? Disciples are people that move throughout the world in a way that brings attention and calls glory to God, His teachings, His unconditional love, and ultimately a way in which you as a human being can live and interact in this world with a moralistic compass that is based off of God's ultimate GPS for us and the ways in which we are supposed to be existing as humans. Now, following Christ was never meant to be comfortable or socially acceptable on a whole. It requires courage to live according to divine truth rather than human opinion. And your willingness to live with conviction reveals the depth of your love for Christ and His trust in your trust in His promises. So here's your first challenge. I want you to choose what your life will stand for. What is your life's purpose? We're created for more than comfort and safety and social acceptance. You were created to live Christ's glory regardless of its earthly cost. The question isn't whether you'll face difficulty, because you will, but whether you'll face it for something worthy of your life and divine calling. I want you to give yourself a call to action. beginning today, I want you to live for something greater than yourself. Whether it needs to be, advocating for child abuse, advocating for animal abuse, advocating for the earth and the ecosystems around you. I want you to challenge yourself to stop living for the human condition and the earthly, societal, and capitalistic frameworks we find ourselves in. And I want you to challenge yourself to live for the greater good. And if you're not ready to accept God in your heart yet, I want you to consider how you could make the world just simply a better place with your conviction, what you live for, what you stand for, and how you go about executing that throughout the world. Our generation, now more than ever, needs examples of people that are living and coming from a place of beliefs, faith, and conviction. The unwavering truth that will guide your life. And those around you will see the change in you, and they will feel the strength and the fulfillment and the peace and the joy that will slowly overcome you when anxiety and fear and the other begin to leave your being, your way of life, and the way you interact with others. And ultimately, it will help to lead them to a place to want to find conviction within themselves and living their life as well. So let's go over these key themes here. I want to make sure we're really nailing this down. Show faith that provides what secular courage cannot. Distinguish between biblical conviction and cultural judgmentalism. Provide concrete steps for yourself for developing and maintaining the conviction and what you choose to stand for in this world. Center all your courage in your relationships with God rather than the human condition and human fallibility. And emphasize within your actions and your conversations how society needs people who will stand for transcendent truth. My Richies, this was a long one, but it was chock full of goodness, and I hope that you picked up what I'm putting down. I'm going through such an immense change in my life, and every episode I bring to you, you can trust and believe is something I am actively working on within my life. I'm not here to preach to you. I'm here to share with you the lessons and the changes within my life that I've found since finding God. And I want to bring it to everyone who is willing to listen, because we are a nation in peril. We are a nation with no belief, no faith, no unconditional love for others, and it has to stop. And it stops with people like you and I finding a moralistic standard, sticking to it, and growing and evolving from that for the greater good of our life and our temporary time here on this earth, and ultimately earning our place in heaven with God the Father, who wants so desperately for us to have this peace while we are here. I hope this episode was everything you were looking for and more. It means so much to me to have your time, attention, and your love. Thank you so much for sharing this. Thank you for tuning in from the 45 plus countries that are listening to the show every week. It means absolutely so much to me. I will continue to make the show for the rest of my life. I love it so much. And the community that we are building here on the Make Life Rich movement is just out of this world. And I'm so thankful for it. And I really, really hope that if this episode did something for you today, you will share it with someone you know that needs it. You can feel free to leave me any comments. You can DM me. You can email me if you have any questions or just want to give me some feedback about the direction we've been taking here on the show. It is just a pure joy and an honor to bring this information to you. And I hope that it helps you to grow 1% ahead in your life this week. My Richies, as always, it is an immense pressure. Make life rich. God bless.